Hi everyone who's just joined. I think our presenter Diane's actually been kicked out of this meeting. I think Teams is playing up a bit, so I guess I'll take over. Yeah, I'd like to welcome everyone to our first LFA evening talk. This one is on the theme of LFA's theme of care. This one's caring for the profession's well-being. And we're going to have a very interesting evening of talks from a varied range of practices, talking about how they've implemented well-being, especially in the last year or so. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, Emily Watts from Grimshaw. And Emily, I don't know whether you could quickly just introduce yourself before going into presentation. That would be great.
Evening again. I work at Grimshaw Architects. I have got a couple of slides that delve a little bit deeper as to my role and who I am. So shall I make a start, Jessica?
Yes, please. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Lovely. Well, thank you everybody for joining this evening. I appreciate people are giving up a lovely summer evening. So really appreciate the support, and just wanted to thank you, Jessica and Diane, for this opportunity. I think it's great that we're talking about this stuff. I mean, there's been quite a few changes in terms of how we speak and support our health and well-being over the recent years. So it's a really great opportunity to come together. And also that this isn't a competition or a bid. We're not competing with each other in terms of practices. This is something we should very much all be sharing in terms of tips and tricks and advice. So a really fantastic forum to be doing that. So I'll take you through, for those of you that may not so familiar with Grimshaw, we're a global practice. We have about 227 people in our London studio. We also have a studio in New York, one in Melbourne and Sydney, and smaller offices in Auckland, Paris and Doha. So for us, we want to make sure that we are supporting everyone that works at Grimshaw globally, hence why we've created a mission statement. So essentially, I don't need to read it out, it's there in front of you, but we're really a practice that like to encourage and support our staff. We embrace open communication and we really support a sense of community, which is incredibly important to us. We also want to inspire and empower our staff to be able to take an active role with regard to their well-being. And it's something that we've been really focused on over the last 3 or 4 years, and I'll take you through that journey. A little bit about me and what I'm doing and why I'm here. I've been at the practice for 13 years. My main role actually is head of admin, so I support the PAs and EAs and facilities staff. But I was fortunate enough through my own experiences with mental health to put my hand up, and with the support of 2 fantastic colleagues, Georgia and Justina, we formed a really strong health and wellbeing team. My journey is focused mainly with addiction issues. So I really feel that I can speak firsthand about my experiences and actually how Grimshaw have supported me through that. So being able to speak firsthand has put me in a really good place to do this role, and it's something that sits alongside my day-to-day role, and it's something I'm really proud to be involved in. So starting off, we started off with quite a big project actually, and really the aim of it was to start breaking down the barriers and the stigma of being able to talk openly about one's well-being. We asked some colleagues, there was 5 of us in total, to journal our stories, and we put them together, and the result was mind-blowing. Which essentially was 5 stories about our experiences with mental health. We covered, as I said, addiction, abuse, and anxiety, and it was really quite instrumental in us being able to talk about it. So we launched it. A little bit nervous as to how it would be received, but the support that we got from everybody, from all of the partners, through to support staff and all of our architects, was incredible, and I don't regret it for one moment. The other really, in terms of creative ideas, Georgia had a fantastic one in terms of us trying to really understand what the stats look like, but in a creative environment. So we created this installation. Each piece of paper on the right hand side, each piece of paper actually indicates a member of staff at Grimshaw. The light blue indicates 1 in 4 people who experience mental health issues. The dark blue pieces were 1 in 3 architect students that received treatment for mental health symptoms. And the coral was 1 in 6 working age adults that have mental health symptoms. So it was a really powerful piece of art, essentially, to really hit home as to how many people within our practice are struggling and maybe not talking about it. Our other great initiative was in 2019. We were really lucky to have Lionheart walk through our doors. He actually came to visit a student exhibition, I believe, and left his card. We got in touch and he's been a friend of the practice ever since. He's an incredible talent. He's currently hosting a BBC Radio 1 show, and he travels around the world and works as a poet. And for our wellbeing week, he joined the practice and sat and spoke to, I think he's created in total about 60 poems just from sitting talking to our architects one-on-one, just getting them to kind of break down the barriers of the connection between wellbeing and architecture. He even travelled to our New York office to do the same there, and it's been incredibly powerful. So we have all of these amazing poems now through working with him. And again, something pretty much like the installation, which is focused on the creatives. So how do we capture the conversations about well-being and also within the creative industry that we're in isn't easy. It's quite challenging. So reflecting over the last, as Jessica said, focusing over the last 15, 16 months, which has been, been quite something that we would never have, put ourselves in or imagined. We really wanted to listen to our staff before we started doing any work to understand actually how they were feeling. And so we did these in one-on-one calls. We have a team of mental health first aiders at Grimshaw. There's 4 of us now. So we all called everybody up just to kind of get an understanding. And 4 trends really came out of those conversations. People really miss the culture, which I'm sure is probably familiar to you, to a lot of you. The uncertainty, it was very uncertain times personally and through work for people. The work-life balance, you'd think working from home, you would achieve that. But actually what we were finding was people work-life balance was even more of a struggle than when they were in the office. I think being able to switch off was very difficult for people. And career progression, how do you do that when you're not face-to-face with people? And how do you have those conversations and mentoring, if you like? How can they happen when we're all working remotely? And I think we also tried to understand what have we learnt from the last 16 months. We have amazingly resilient staff and adapted incredibly well to change. We do see quite a high anxiety regarding returning to work. So that's something that we're really focused on. We really want to become proactive and not reactive. And obviously, I think a lot of us became reactive going into lockdown. And I think now we can understand the bigger picture a little bit more. So we would like to become more proactive. What we want to do now as well at Grimshaw is we really want to focus on the 6 in 6. We've been very focused previously on the 1 in 6. But what we really want to do is target everybody. So that's a little bit of a new challenge for us. In how do we capture everyone in these conversations. And we're having a really robust employees assistance program. So really we want to make sure those lines of support are really clear to staff and how is that signposted and encouraged. Why is this important? And I think this is an obvious one. We really want people to say that they're not okay. And I think we're getting there. But it's always a work in progress and will be for some time. Some interesting stats, and as I said at the beginning, we are a global practice, so we really want to work with our global wellbeing champions on this, and I think this really hits home. As I mentioned before, the 1 in 6 working age adults have symptoms. The worrying one for us is New York, actually, 1 in 5, but they feel this was in 2019. They feel this may have tripled. And And actually, it's a conversation that we don't like to talk about over there. So actually, that's really somewhere where we really want to focus on developing in terms of the communication. And in Australia, 1 in 5 experience mental illness. The worrying thing there is 54% of them don't access treatment. What have we done through lockdown? So a few of the ideas that have been really successful, as I mentioned earlier, the "Are you okay?" calls, and it's really, really important to listen. So I think I never underestimate actually how long that takes. But it's really good, I think, to be able to speak to people that aren't necessarily in your team, in your projects or in your department, but actually making those calls to people and checking in. Right at the beginning, we sent everybody postcards, which was a really inexpensive kind of way of just touching base. It's lovely to get something through the door. We're all, used to getting emails and texts, etc. But actually having something fall through the letterbox was really well received. We've just done something recently called Stealing Positivity, which was fun. And again, a really inexpensive way of cheering people up. And we sent them sunflower seeds. So it was with bright yellow envelope coming through the door. And we're going to be doing a sunflower growing competition, which actually also really falls in nicely with the World Health Foundation's theme this year, which is nature. So trying to kind of capture that. Encouraging communication, I think that needs to find a real balance. I think people are tired of Zooms, burnt out, etc. So how do we encourage communication? But it's just so important to check in. It's very easy for somebody to sit on Zooms day in, day out, maybe not with a camera on or even having the opportunity to speak in meetings. So we really encourage communication across all levels. We've kept our office open. Actually, for those that really can't or are struggling from working from home, we've kept our office open. We've changed the office setup, actually, so when they come back, it doesn't feel like you've kind of getting 227 people in an office. We're actually looking at cohorts and what that looks like in collaboration spaces rather than a working office. We've got an extra mental health first aider, which has been fantastic, and I would really encourage studios and practices to invest in that, as they would fire wardens and first aiders. And we're also doing a lot of work with the Architects Mental Wellbeing Forum, which is a great place to share ideas and come together. And what does our wellbeing future look like at Grimshaw? So as I mentioned before, I think it's really important that we focus on the 6 and 6 rather than trying to work with people who have really hit rock bottom. I think it's important to start these conversations really early on. We want to empower staff to look after their own well-being and try to be able to identify what that looks like and where the change is happening and maybe why. We want to be more personal and accessible all of the time. So we want to find something that actually, at nighttime, maybe when actually it's probably the worst time of day to sit and dwell on things. It's actually what we're looking to find a tool where actually you can reach out and get some support. And we've got a really fun Global Wellbeing Week planned, which is the 21st to the 25th of June. And we've actually broken it down into pillars. So each day we're going to be focused on a different pillar of well-being. So nutrition, the environment, movement, stillness and relationships. So we're going to try and have some fun with it at Grimshaw. It takes some time to organise these things, but actually it can be something really simple each day. So that's where we're looking. I think rather than kind of leaping ahead, I think we're going to take it day by day, which is incredibly important, and to see and to react to how staff are feeling. And that's pretty much it, actually, from me. So really, really keen to hear from the other presenters and what they've been doing. But thank you for listening.
Yeah, as I was saying, it's really interesting to see some really positive, some simple kind of and fun tasks which you're using to help your staff get through this period, and that it's an ongoing thing. It's not, we're just going to do it for this month. It's throughout the year. I think there were some really, really useful gems that our audience can take away and implement in their practice. So we're going to talk next. We're going to hear from next Julie Bramsdon from Assael Architecture. Julie, over to you. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone, and it is a pleasure to be here this evening as part of the Wellbeing Talk during the London Festival of Architecture. As Diane said, I'm Julie Bramsdon. I'm the HR manager at Assael Architecture. and I joined the practice in December 2019, so it was just in time to enter the COVID challenge. I really didn't know what I was going to be up against. Fortunately, the practice is a wonderful place to work. It's very people-centric, and it certainly has been a sort of testing time in the 18 months, but I think our philosophy and who we are has really kind of stood us in good stead. We're a team of 85 people, consisting of award-winning architects, urban designers, landscape architects, interior designers and visualizers, and we're based in Putney, southwest London. And you know, before I sort of look into the specifics around wellbeing, I just wanted to share with you a little bit about us and what we are as a company. So the COVID challenge obviously came along, and here there's just a fun way of sharing, you know, recognizing the time we were in. We created rainbows. It was just one of the sort of social times we got together, marking the occasion that was, you know, recognizing the pandemic that we were in, but also the a bit of fun and social time that we could have during the difficult period. For the past year and a half, it really has been about the human and human resources, and wellbeing has really been a priority in the company, you know, as we've had our physical and psychological safety put to the test. So in terms of us, I think this goes to the heart of wellbeing for me. We are an EOT, so an employee-owned trust, and we have been since 2018. And we have the values here on the screen that really have been lived out throughout this time, but really sit at the heart of the business. And for me, each one of those has weighted importance in terms of being able to sustain and offer a wellbeing offer that really is helping your people in the company. We've navigated some difficult situations, and our employee elected trustees have been critical in providing the employee voice to help us navigate those difficult situations, and you know, really being able to sort of respond in an informed way and making the key decisions along the way have really been sort of borne out by us upholding the values, and the leadership team, all of our directors here, you know, living out those as well, and making sure that each time, you know, we are addressing the needs of our people in terms of well-being with all of that in mind. Another thing during the whole time and helping the well-being has been communication. It just can't be underestimated how important it is. You can see there a sort of a screen of pictures, but that represents a weekly newsletter, you know, well, some of them that we've sent out over the course of the year. In the beginning, you know, during all of that uncertainty, it was bi-weekly, and it was a really critical thing to make sure that people were informed, involved, assured, as people sort of were affected by different sort of levels of anxiety, worries, concerns around the pandemic and what was happening with the work shift, and how we were going to get through this, and just hearing, you know, week on week, you know, what was happening in the business, what the critical sort of government statements were, what we were doing in terms of our sort of wellbeing offer to keep everybody connected and physically and mentally well was really important. We surveyed a lot, have surveyed along the way as well, just to get direct sort of pulse points of key information and just being able again to respond to that. So when we moved out to be remote working, it was very much a sort of new thing for us. You know, we'd had a few people doing occasional flexible working arrangements, but essentially, you know, setting up 90 offices came as a challenge. But we, you know, with our values at the heart, you know, we really kind of were able to respond and set up with IT support equipment, issue out home working guides, and it was really that sort of making sure people were comfortable and feeling safe in their home environments, because this was all new, and giving them the support and tools they needed to just get established in the workplace. Then we had the office open also, so it was trying to then take away fear that was kind of coming about returning to the office. You know, we'd had some out for a period, and it was trying to create something user friendly, show them fun ways in terms of what we'd thought about, to make sure that they were coming back and we'd taken care of all the worries, and we were inducting people like they were new to the company again, making sure they had any sort of concerns heard and dealt with before actually getting back into the office environment. So if I look at what we do, well-being, in terms of well-being along the different strands, so physical well-being, mental well-being and social well-being, and I'll just talk you through sort of what we were doing before and what we've adapted and how we've been doing it since the pandemic started. So we're a very sort of active bunch, competitive office, so we like the physical challenges. We have running clubs, tag rugby, netball, cycling, yoga, and of course this all sort of ceased, and we knew it was still going to be important to keep those offers going in terms of physical well-being. So we just moved it online. So we had an online yoga, we did running challenges where we could create, you know, pictures in Strava and have competitions. We did keepy uppies with the toilet rolls. Recently we've entered into the Iceni challenge, so we've got walk, run, or do your home workouts, and for that you earn so many kilometers, and that all goes towards a common goal of achieving a distance around the world. So we're keeping that connection, and we're keeping people active, and even during that sort of one walk that we were allowed in the lockdown period was really sort of encouraging people to get out in nature and have a physical time outside and share those experiences, so that we could keep the activity up. In terms of mental well-being, this has always been at the heart of Assael, and we do have, like Grimshaw, you know, a wellbeing committee, and it really is about us educating around the different sort of mental health challenges, being active in promoting the sort of mental health awareness week, and for this year it was the focus on kindness, so we did a whole sort of spread on that. We share newsletters, we share presentations, we have chats, we have tea and talks monthly. So again, it's, you know, those communications to make sure that everyone is having an opportunity to hear something around mental health, but also have time to contribute. And where we were sort of identifying people who need more support, I mean, we did regular HR check-ins one-on-one with people, but where we identified people really needing support, it was making sure that they were getting the professional outsourced help. And I think that's where it's really valuable that you have provision for professional help. So we have Vitality who provide our healthcare, and they have counselling services, they have an app, as well as in-person appointments. Obviously, with the increased demand, especially in this first quarter of the year, it was proving a little bit delayed in terms of what they could provide treatment-wise. So I found there my role to be sort of, you know, chasing the care offer and making sure it was coming through timely, because with mental health you can't really delay these things, and 6 weeks time is too long to wait. So it's also looking at local services, because we had everyone dispersed, you know, making sure that people could access somebody at home if that was needed. Also being in touch with specialist organisations, so around bereavement we used Cruise, for instance. And as Emily mentioned, the Architectural Mental Wellbeing Forum, they have a brilliant set of tools to and resources that, you know, are readily accessible, and they also promote the Architects Benevolent Society, so they're linked to Anxiety UK, and again they provide counselling services. So, you know, a range of options to make sure that anyone who needed to access that care was able to quickly and be supported, internally as well as externally. The mental health first aid training is also something that we're doing. So we're going to have a further 2 people trained internally to have, again, that sort of more specialist knowledge within Assael's offices. We've also found financial well-being to be something that we have had to sort of share around. So we've had our benefit providers come in and talk to people about different sort of finance options, also where there's been concerns around money during this time. It's been about being able to sort of access support and hear and give people the time they need to address those issues and ask support where we could. So in terms of social well-being, giving something back is at the heart of Assael. So we've always been a community here, but we also have a bigger community in Putney, and we were very involved in providing lunches to elderly people, helping local people with gardening and decorating. Obviously, that couldn't happen with the shutdowns and things. So we again just sort of moved that online. So we looked at other ways that we could still be community caregiving and sharing, and we donated clothing, we gave blood, we got involved in local food banks, and some of them would sort of physical exercise to go out and deliver foods and medicines, and incorporate that into the physical side as well as the community and social side. We've also tried to keep our sort of connections internally. We've always had quite a good social sort of calendar. So we've had, replaced our sort of virtual drinks. We've sent out champagne at Christmas so we can all be online and celebrate. Sharing Easter eggs and just those little things to show, that we're still thinking of everyone and being able to share as a community together has been really important. We've had virtual challenges, so we created Battle of the Studios and did it as a sort of Harry Potter themed director-led challenge, and that really kept up morale for quite a while. Diversity and inclusion is also something we hold dear at Assael, and obviously in the last year, that's that people's identity and being inclusive has really been important. Creating opportunities for open conversations, helping people work through the different challenges that were presented, and we've shared sort of film and book reviews and had some really great conversations, and just that opportunity for people to get together and share what's going on for them, and give each other support. And going back to our Assael values, the kindness, support has really been paramount during all of this time. So we have had our challenges Assael and continue to do so, but I think in terms of what we've been doing for wellbeing, I think it's about being open and being able to evolve the offer, and keep sort of evaluating what our people need and want, and responding accordingly. Thank you for listening, and it's been good to share what we've been doing at Assael.
Thank you. Thanks, Julie. That's, again, it's the simple little things. So in a sense, there's like no excuse really. You just need to think about what, not always what would I like to do, what would X person like to do or receive, and I'm sure that's had such a positive impact on your team and on your staff. So thanks for sharing, and I hope those listening again are making some little notes in terms of what they can do. Even though we are coming out of the worst, it's good to keep the momentum going. So next up we have Chris Kennedy from Kennedy Woods Architecture, and I've got a little line here that says Kennedy Woods puts people, planet and sustainability at the heart of what they do. I'm proud to be the UK's first Architecture B Corporation, and Chris is going to talk to us about how they approach how their approach affects the practice and their staff. So over to you, Chris.
Great. Well, look, guys, thank you so much, Dan. That was such a kind intro. We're absolutely thrilled to get the chance to speak this evening. It's obviously a topic we're really passionate about as a practice. So thank you for having us and giving us a chance to sort of do some reflection. So our focus today will be focused on, we're focusing on culture building as a small practice. It's something that's been a really strong focus for us since setting up. So we wanted to share a couple of key learnings and reflections to all the other small studios listening in. As Dan mentioned, we're Kennedy Woods. Oh, sorry, next slide, Jess. Sorry, we'll get there. As Diane mentioned, we're Kennedy Woods. We're a 7-year-old studio in Peckham's Bussey building. Next slide. And this is our team. We're now a practice of 9. We're architects and designers. We're of 6 nationalities. Next slide. And this is our mission. So we look to create positive impact through design by focusing ultimately on the end user. Next slide, please, Jess. Before we get into our 4 learnings that we wanted to discuss this evening, we wanted to quickly set the scene as to why we feel a discussion around culture is so important. And for a small business, for all small businesses under pressure, I think we feel that culture is often seen as, one of the first things to be overlooked. And we'd like to make a bit of a case for why this should be a concern for all business owners, but especially smaller practices looking to scale. And next slide, please, Jess. First key point for us is that small practices make up the majority of our industry. So collectively, we do have a shared responsibility to do the very best we can to look after our people. Next slide, please, Jess. This majority stake applies to both number of businesses, with teams of 0 to 9 making up 97% of the industry. Next slide. But also in number of people as a total. So with 76% of all industry professionals working in 0 to 9 person teams, it just goes to show for us practices with the least in the way of resources ultimately can determine key trends within the industry. And for us, this means we need to set our sights really, really high. Next slide, please. So our second point is that culture often can, for small practices, feel like a nice to have. But for us, it feels, and we'd love more small practices to really consider it a major selling point. So these stats are up on the screen at the moment make what we hope is a really clear case for business owners to consider the role of culture when addressing issues such as recruitment, as the first stat alludes to, issues around team motivation and talent retention. Next slide, please. Ultimately, we as a practice believe that focusing on culture can create a virtuous cycle. And our philosophy is invest into our culture, attract and retain a great team, do great work, and reinvest into that culture and can make the cycle turn for us. And next slide, sorry. And ultimately, we see culture as an essential part of a well-functioning business.
Thanks, Tom. And yet, I think despite all these benefits, there are still some prevalent issues in the industry that negatively impact on culture and well-being. So we're using the 2 terms fairly interchangeably here, but I think we thought it was important to bring to the table. Next slide, please. Important to address, I guess, the elephant in the room here and some root causes of poor culture that can't really be patched over with away days or team picnics, things that are really fundamental causes of some of the stress and overwork and certain issues that we see in the industry. So next slide, please. One example of that, some data published just a couple of months ago by the Architects Journal, which is still showing a lack of fair pay in the industry, with almost 50% of respondents in the survey being paid at less than a real living wage at Part 1 level. Next slide, please. And then also expectations around overtime. I think this was a much smaller group responding to, actually in an open letter to the RIBA, asking for help in a way. And I think a mix of Part 1 and Part 2s, 20% of them said they regularly worked more than 10 plus hours of overtime per week. And we know that such issues are excluding people from the profession, both at an entry level and also compounding issues such as gender inequality for those in practice, but yet seemingly these kind of issues still prevail. And then thirdly, just to say another challenge, next slide, please. Thirdly, a final challenge, I guess, maybe more targeted at small practice, which is that of support and training. And I think, you know, overwork, stress, challenges with communication, some of this is coming from poor practice management. And I think before getting on to other things to talk about ideas and things we have to kind of improve our culture, I think just to say it's really essential for small businesses to double down and focus on the blind spots and maybe the weaknesses that you have, and seek out support to try and overcome those, because that will give a strong foundation for building a healthy practice and a healthy working culture. So we know, next slide, please. So we know that it can feel like a bit of a balancing act, and as a studio that have always placed culture as on an equal footing with mission and our commercial success, you know, we know this has been a challenge, but it's something that we believe really strongly is an essential part of healthy practice. Next slide, please. And this has led us on a journey ultimately to become the UK's first B Corporation certified architecture practice, which is a formal commitment and an obligation to balance people, planet, and profit in all the work we do. And for anyone out there who's considering signing up to it, it's a brilliant scheme. The framework's really well structured, and it's really opened our eyes as a smaller business to some of the changes we could make to improve our practice. And while a lot of these are kind of nuts and bolts under the bonnet and not what we're going to talk about today, I think the important thing to say in this first section was set your red lines about what is and isn't acceptable, and make sure you're doing the basics well, tackling the root causes before moving on to patch over the symptoms.
So, okay, so that was just a little bit of context, I think, within which we wanted to we've been doing a lot of reflecting and building up to today's presentation, and we just wanted to arrive with 4 key learnings that we feel maybe sum up the hardest challenges and maybe some of the biggest lessons we've learned in our 7 years in practice. So we thought we'd take you through each one and then maybe give you a few examples that ways we address those in practice. Next slide, please. So challenge 1, I think most common challenge that many small businesses are going to agree with and share is obviously, being the size we are, it's always a challenge around budget, resources, maybe a lack of kind of an actual formal HR department, etc. in terms internally within the business. Next slide. And I think we've come to realize just how much creativity and attention are potentially more important than a big budget when trying to cultivate culture. Next slide. This can be something as small as keeping 15 minutes free for a morning coffee together. And this is something the team now does every single day in the studio. Next slide, please. To our more formal culture call check-in meeting. It's an hour a week. There's no project updates discussed. This is a chance for team members to just come together, reflect, evaluate, and feedback to one another on how they feel the health of the company's culture is. Next slide, please. Another modest gesture. We tried to make our growth and progress visible. We buy a new studio plant for every new project that we win as a team. But actually, over time, this has gone on to massively define our studio's character. Next slide, please. There's Nicola there working in the corner. Next slide, please. And finally, we've learned just how important it is to stop and really reflect on the people that have helped us along the way. And we've tried to find creative and cost-efficient ways to express this gratitude, whether it's through events we've held to commemorate landmark achievements, like our 5th birthday here. Next slide, please. Or even sort of simple prizes and treasures we've made to make moments have more sense of occasion. So these are some of the medals we gave on our 1st birthday as a practice at a sort of prize-giving ceremony. And we awarded a medal to each of the 5 friends who have given us the biggest push during our 1st year in business. Next slide, please.
So a second challenge we've encountered that I think many small studio owners might feel is, despite kind of having put people and culture up on a pedestal, even with our best efforts to do a great job, our time as directors is stretched. And I think sometimes, despite attempts and putting energy, and we felt like we were falling short of our standards. Next slide, please. But what we've really learned, I think, is that culture building is it works best as a collective act, and for ideas to take root, they really need to be owned by everyone. And they not only work, but they really flourish when people are empowered to not only raise issues, but actually suggest changes for improving things, and then take action in making those taking those ideas to reality. So to give a quick example of this, next slide, please. I'm going to talk briefly about the rep roles we established within the studio. So this is one idea we had of how to connect the team with various aspects of studio life, things that were important to us, but actually outside of the scope of our project work. And the idea is that different team members take on roles each for a day a month, leading the charge on key issues for the studio. And not only does this create a sort of accountability for us to stand behind things that we're saying are important and make them move forward, but it also allows input and ownership, and ultimately it becomes a collective effort to progress the studio's culture. Next slide, please. So, for example, Jen's role here as a philanthropist relates directly to some of our B Corp accreditation criteria. So whether that's helping design the experience of students coming to visit a practice, or whether that's how we manage charitable giving and voluntary time, that kind of falls into her responsibility. Or Paco as the personal trainer here, helping focus on personal development, which is something I think really important to everyone in their career, but particular challenge of small practice. Next slide, please. But more than putting this on the heads of just individuals and kind of passing off responsibility, the point of this is to actually make people into a dedicated point of contact for anyone to discuss key aspects of practice life. And so to make that point, we kicked off the roles a couple of years ago with a speed dating session where every individual had 7 minutes with every other individual in the practice to kind of quickly brainstorm ideas for how they could kind of get their role started. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, third challenge. How might we encourage cognitive diversity and collaboration? Next slide, please. So for us, the key to effective collaboration with a diverse and multidisciplinary team is in having a clearly defined and shared set of values, which the team can get behind. And we've worked really, really hard to define these. And we like to think they guide our behaviors and decision-making every day. But ultimately, they're only valuable if visible and recognized by the whole team. Next slide. So these are our 4 values of empathy, tenacity, questioning, and a recent addition, spark. And we try to make these as visible as possible on as many touch points as possible with team members. So whether that's job adverts for new hires, onboarding collateral, it's framed in the studio, we hinge our 360 review process around the values. And even, sorry, next slide. And even during our annual parties and prize giving, where we celebrate individuals who have best championed the company's values as voted for by their colleagues. Next slide, please. Nipping back to this slide, just to talk about Spark quickly, we do feel it's imperative to continually reflect on the values, and Spark was actually suggested to us by a team member long after the other three were agreed upon, but it was to encompass our love and passion for celebrating creative ambition, encouraging exploration through play. Next slide, please. There might actually be a duplicate there. But for us, our winning formula to draw out Spark is designing a team-based game that requires always the construction of a design under time pressure to solve a challenge and for a creative prize. So over the years, there have been some amazing moments, whether that's from 50 people building sailboats to race across a pool powered by desk fans. As you can see, one excited chap there doing very well. Next slide, please. To our team building a 9-hole crazy golf course in the studio as part of a team party. Next slide. To creating fully fledged games. So we can give, this is a game we've made, it's called the Jazzimals. And it's a creative drawing game, which we use as a bit of an icebreaker with new clients that sees you draw your jazz band of safari animals, which we translated into 5 languages. And it's now actually available online. So you can buy that as a kit. It's something that we've sort of productized from the studio to tell people more about us. Next slide. ultimately, we sort of know this is all a good bit of fun, but I think for us, underlying the laughs is something we take very, very seriously. And these moments of excitement and frivolity and fun we have at the studio, it's ultimately where we feel amazing things can happen when trying to build a team and trying to build a culture. So as an example, we take a point of thanking every visitor or guest participant with a letter that reinforces this philosophy and makes sure everyone's understood why we're up to what we're doing. Next slide, please.
So just to wrap up, I think the final challenge is that despite everything we've said, it's honestly actually still a real challenge to make time and focus on culture. And it's taken a pandemic, I think, to show a lot of businesses how important it is, and also how quickly things can take a turn for the worse. Next slide, please. But ultimately, our experience is that it really does pay dividends. So there's a bit of a parting reflection. Next slide, please. Just to share a bit of a running joke, Tom and I have that progression as a small practice can sometimes feel like a bit of a game of snakes and ladders. And it is easy to get frustrated or disappointed if you're always looking ahead to the next thing and the next opportunity. But actually, the really rewarding aspect of focusing in on culture building for the whole team is whether you're progressing up the ladder or whether you're riding down the snake. I think the relationships, the camaraderie, the collective endeavor along the journey, that will get you through, I think, as individuals and as a team. Next slide, please. And so, as Tom said, while some of the things we do on the culture side can seem trivial at first glance, I think putting the time in to build a really strong culture and ethos will help build trust, respect, and an ability to work in teams that are actually really essential aspects of a healthy working practice. I think whatever the size of business, it's something we really need to take seriously. So final slide, please. So just quickly before handing over, just wanted to do a big shout out to our mentor, Kate, whose details are here. Her input's been absolutely formative in a lot of our thinking around culture, and we really couldn't have got to where we are without her help. So I think if anyone in any size practice is looking for support on leadership, culture or management of creative teams, we'd be very happy to make an introduction because she's really great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys. That's just amazing. I remember when I first met you, and I always felt that you guys were big kids, and you kind of took it seriously and actually have put it in your practice. And it's just really encouraging to see how you've taken your youthful, playful energy and turned it into kind of your business ethos. And it's just great. I was just making a few notes. So I love the plant for every project, and it looks like you've got a mini forest happening there, so that's good to see. And I do remember you're in the making projects where you've been involved with the RBA, supporting young youth thinking about coming into architecture, and those sessions were always fun, even down to like your referee uniform. So it's attention to detail as well. So our last speaker for today is Carl Turner. And before the pandemic, Carl's work, I've got here, before the pandemic, Turner Works decided to take the radical decision to give everyone a few weeks in the summer off after seeing this adopted by practices in Denmark. Carl's going to be talking about how their new approach to holiday and working hours has affected staff well-being. So, over to you, Carl.
Hi, Diane. Yeah, thank you. No slides from me. I'm just going to chat. I'll keep it short. But yeah, so we are a practice of about 20 people. We're based in Hackney. We rebranded a couple of years ago from Carl Turner Architects to Turner Works. And that was partly, or actually mainly, really about moving the practice on from being a practice that really revolved around myself, having started as a very small practice and doing residential work. And in many ways, we felt that the word architect was also holding us back. So our rebrand of Turner Works talks about the 4 things that we do: imagining, designing, making, and running. And if you think that most architects do the designing bit, we do the bit before design, actually putting projects together. We also build. I've built projects for many years, and increasingly, because we specialize in meanwhile, or temporary projects in kind of startup spaces. We also sometimes run projects, as in be a kind of paternalistic landlord to get the thing off the ground, and we're doing that currently with a project. So yeah, slightly unusual way that we work, and I think with having that mentality of doing other things other than what architects do, I've always done things a bit differently, and I think the whole thing about extra holiday came initially from talking or being in the contracting business really, and the way that the Christmas holidays kind of became a thing. So for the last few years, we've always closed down for at least 2 weeks over Christmas. We've given staff the extra days, and it's partly because of the lifestyle that you want for yourselves, and I think it's become a really great thing that lots of people do now. And I think in 2018, I was going out to Copenhagen. I met a few architects out there, and we were working with a DTI, trying to figure out a way how we might break in to be able to work in Northern Europe. And the tactic was to meet some architects that we could then team up with. And actually, we've actually never won any work out there, but it was actually just an amazing cultural thing, seeing the way that that many of these guys actually worked. And the thing that really struck me was, kind of late spring, early summer, they were like, yeah, we're just packing up because we're going off to the cabin for 6 weeks. And I was like, what do you mean? And they said, well, yeah, we just close everybody in Copenhagen. The whole place shuts down, and we all take the summer off. So to cut a long story short, the next year in 2019, we'd talked a lot in the studio about whether that would be a good tactic for us, along with the relaunch, the new Turner Works, and very mindful of, as a small practice of about 20 people, how we think we pay pretty well. We encourage kind of 9 to 5 working hours. Again, back to that contracting sort of mindset. You get paid for the hours you work, and we've always worked like that. So we basically asked everybody in the studio that if we gave you 2 extra weeks holiday, so instead of 4 weeks plus the usual extra days, if we gave you 6 weeks, would you then take 2 of your existing weeks within August, and then we'd match it with 2 extra weeks? So effectively that we would experiment with trying to close the studio for the whole of August. And by and large, it worked. We actually had some resistance, amazingly. A couple of people were a bit like, we don't want to be told when to take holiday, and we were like, well, it's not about that. It's not compulsory, it's optional. And I think for us as a practice, we realized that the sense that one of the great things over the Christmas holidays is that everybody's off on holiday, so therefore no work's going on behind the scenes, so you can actually really relax. And we could really see the benefit in that. And also as a smallish practice, we definitely felt that we were always a bit short-handed, because it seemed like perpetually everybody was on holiday, and there was lots of holiday banking going on. And so actually it made sense as a studio if we kind of formalize a sort of a period, and we talked about maybe a period mid-July to the end of August, and then that coincided with kind of kids back to school. So I think in the end everybody agreed that it was a good idea, and we went ahead with the experiment. It was great. It worked really well. Except for me, I didn't really get much time off, unfortunately. My partner Susie, who just joined as a director, she also sort of covered for the summer, and I think our finance manager also was sort of keen to just kind of work part-time. So we had a little core team. We had a couple of new starters as well who'd only just started in June, so they worked through the summer. So we managed to have a sort of core team. So for the core team of us that were around most of the summer, it was actually really tough because we did have to pick up a lot of that extra work, and we had a couple of pictures to do. But generally, as an idea, it worked really, really well. And I think everybody came back in September. There was a massive kind of energy rush, and it was something that we planned to do last year in 2020. And so I'll just talk a little bit about how the pandemic affected that thinking, and also what we're doing this year. So what we realized actually at the end of the year was that it was quite a big financial ask, and obviously it did put pressure on having a sort of skeleton crew. I think the idea that we could completely close the studio sort of, it wasn't maybe going to work. So what we were going to experiment with last year was maybe just trying something a bit different, where we'd say that we'd give an extra week maybe, just so it wasn't quite so financially burdensome. And that in the context of a small practice where we're not really making a profit, you know, we're just about breaking even. So we haven't got a lot of cash to throw around. So last summer we planned to do an extra week, but extend the period to kind of 6 weeks, sort of mid-July to the end of August. So there was, and then we'd have a kind of maybe 2 or 3 teams, so that there was, so that you maybe didn't get all of your weeks consecutively, but you got 2 weeks, and then a week on, then a week off. So that was what we were going to do. Obviously the pandemic struck, and we effectively had to abandon plans for that last year. We really struggled through the pandemic. We won a huge project just before lockdown. We then, obviously everybody went home. We had to kind of figure out how to sort of service this really big new project. It was a great buzz that we'd won it. It was fantastic. And then just after the government had stopped allowing you to furlough staff members, the client, this big workspace project, decided to shelve the project, gave us 2 weeks notice. And we pretty much all our other work had finished over the summer, and we suddenly just didn't have hardly any work. It was a real horrible moment. So what we had done is we're part of the London Practice Forum, which is a group of architects that try to work together and share resources. So earlier on in the summer, when we'd been too busy, we'd actually managed to borrow a couple of people from other practices who'd immediately been hit by the pandemic because they were housing architects. So we'd borrowed staff members for a few months. And then when our turn came to be affected really badly by the pandemic, we managed to loan out several members of staff to other practices who by then had recovered and they were taking on people. We did have to make a couple of redundancies in basic support staff roles. And then that wasn't quite enough. So then eventually we had to go on to 4-day weeks. So that was across the board. We had a kind of discussion and decided that that was a good way forward. So everybody took a 20% pay cut, but then only worked 4-day weeks. So we ran that till the end of last year, and then frantically looked for work last quarter of last year, which started to come in January fantastically. So we were able to get everybody back full time. We got our seconded members of staff back in January and February, and we're sort of rebuilding now and thinking about this year. And one of the problems we got with holiday now is that people didn't really want to take holiday last year. But again, we you know, in terms of morale, we haven't really got cash to pay for the holiday that people didn't take, so we're allowing people to pull the holiday over into this year. And then, but we are planning over July and August this year to change things up a little bit. So this summer, what we're going to do is experiment with 4-day working weeks. So that will be for full pay, so that over the summer months, we will have kind of Friday, Saturday, Sunday with everybody else. So we won't man the studios on Friday. So it's a sort of not quite as full on as closing the whole studio, but hopefully it will give everybody a breather over the summer. And I think what the whole kind of you know, the fact that we'd given a lot of extra holiday, and we were trying to, you know, before the pandemic, to try and figure out ways of actually having a better work-life balance, trying to take more time off, trying to not work long hours, you know, trying to, you know, we do many of the things other people have talked about in terms of like office culture and studio culture and all of that kind of thing. So I think what that did was it put us in a really strong position, and everybody understood when actually the chips were down last year and it was a really tough time, that it wasn't through, you know, mismanagement or you know, that there was anything that we could have done about it. It was just, it was the times we were in, and actually everybody rallied around and really tried to get behind the practice. And I think everybody could see it for what it was, and actually that, you know, we did our best to actually try and retain everybody and not lose team members. So So yeah, I think I would just wrap up by saying that hopefully it was a really good experiment. We didn't quite get it right, but I think this idea of that, you know, everybody's had a taste of kind of a lot more freedom, and that is something that I guess we all want for ourselves. We don't want to feel like we're at work the whole time. So we have a reopened studio. People that live nearby that can walk or cycle are coming in some of the time. People that live further afield are still largely working at home. And I think we're, like many studios, we're just searching for a new formula where the workspace becomes more of a sort of home base, and we'll be a lot more relaxed about the way that people work remotely in the future. And I think we were already building those kind of trusts, that two-way trust before the pandemic. So for us, it's been a further experiment, really. Sort of seeing how the whole holiday thing can play out. So I think that's probably all I can say on it for now, Diane. And I'm more than happy to get cross-examined.
Brilliant. Thanks, Carl. That's amazing. I love the way that you just kind of take risks and, let's try this. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else. And I think that kind of is a testament to what we are as architects. We're creative, and, you know, we need to apply that in our business structure as well. So thanks for sharing. Can I ask the rest of the speakers to switch their cameras on, because we're going to go into a little bit of a Q&A session now. Angus says he finds humour is a great way of building healthy relationships in a studio situation. Discuss. Well, Angus, do you want to unmute yourself and start the discussion? Are you there still, Angus?
Yes, I'm still here. It was.
Okay.
You can't hear me, can you?
I can hear you.
Yeah. Sorry if I came across a little bit cheeky, but I was.
Not at all.
I just found that in my experience, humor, as long as it's not pointed and particularly vicious, can be a really good way and a really healthy way to build relationships within a studio environment. I've had a variety of different experiences in my work life, some working for a council and some working for private architects. And they vary greatly in terms of the amount of interaction that they expect from you, both on work projects, professionally, and outside of your work area as well. And as I said, I've found it's quite odd sometimes, the difference between the different practice situations and how much they expect you to interact sort of outside of work.
Thanks, Angus. One of the things out of what Angus was saying, because he's saying, like, you know, humour, first of all, what's funny for you might not be funny for someone else. So it's about reading the room, but not also reading the room. It's about reading the people in the room as well. Because in a group of people, you might have some extroverts and you might have some introverts, and it's also about cultural intelligence. So I totally understand what you're saying, Angus, and there's also kind of like the science behind that. Really at that, or else, you know, it could make coming to the office really uncomfortable for. I'd just like to ask, a question out there is following on from that. How do you deal with introverts, those that are not into kind of team building, groups, exercises? How do you make them feel comfortable in your work environment? Anyone?
I think probably, Diane, it's more, and let me know if you get terrible feedback from me again, but I think then if you recognise that somebody's more of an introvert, is actually dealing maybe with something more on a one-to-one basis. Like you said, it's about reading the room and understanding what environment they feel safe and secure to share, or just kind of bring down the boundaries a bit. But I think it's about maybe adapting to that person rather than that person adapting to you and your culture, which is easy when you've got 227 people to look after. But I think actually when you do that, I think the effect is really rewarding.
Thanks, Emily. And that kind of relates to like what we're hearing in the news today with Naomi, the tennis player, how she's kind of refused to do press interview because of her anxiety. Yet it is a part of her job. And, you know, the industry is kind of fining her until she's actually had to say, well, I'm going to have to pull out for the sake of my mental health. I think that in today's climate, especially the architectural profession, we are very much more aware of our staff's mental health. But I think, and this is just what I am, you know, this is just me thinking, when as directors, how aware are you of your own mental health? We seem to be putting staff needs ahead of kind of your role. So perhaps maybe Carl and Tom and Chris, as like small practice directors, how do you deal with that for yourself?
Do you want to go first, Carl?
Yeah, go on then. I will jump in. Yeah, I think for myself and Susie, it's been really tough actually. I think we've both felt really burned out, and it's actually, you know, in a small practice you end up becoming jack of all trades, and it's actually been it's been a lot of hard work trying to keep everybody motivated and trying to do all of the things that sort of happen just, you know, naturally in an office environment, that it just happens by osmosis because you're all in the same room. You can do all of those things. So I think, yeah, we've found that it's been quite tough, and it's something that we talked about a lot actually, about how we can both stay motivated as well as the team. But I suppose that ultimately that, you know, it's your practice, you're the director, and it's that's what you sign up for, I guess. So it's not always for the faint-hearted, but I think, you know, it very much is. I really feel like I need a serious holiday, but obviously it's not very easy to take holidays at the moment. But I think just removing yourself physically, going away somewhere else, it's really important. And I think a lot of directors don't do that. They just, you know, they're still engaged when they're on holiday. And I think that's something that we're very much keen to do. And part of the thing about wanting more time off is I want it for myself as much for anybody else. And I'm trying to set a kind of basis up where whatever, you know, I feel like I need, I guess everybody else needs it. So I, you know, trying to set a system up where we can be more like a business and less like a kind of weird cult that many architecture practices are, where, you know, we take care of business and then that buys us the time that we need to do other things. So yeah, it has taken its toll. It's been a really tough few months actually, but you know, the sun's been shining, summer's here. It feels like lockdown's kind of easing off. I've just had my second jab this week. And yeah, you know, I'm really looking forward to light at the end of the tunnel. I think it's much needed for everybody, really.
Thanks, Carl. Carl, Chris?
Yeah, I think a lot of shared experiences there. It's been a jolly tough, especially I think for us, maybe sort of December, January time to now it's felt like the big push, and I think it has been really tough. I definitely agree with Carl's observation that as a director of a small practice, maybe it's quite easy to fall into that sort of slight jack of all trades role, just trying to kind of keep the machine that is the business running. And I think we've realized, I think mental health has obviously been pushed to the front of the agenda this year. It's been something, the pandemic has engaged us as a practice with it in a way that we probably weren't before. And I think we're just realizing, we're coming around to the realization now, this is just another process that needs to be designed into the business. And That means we're reaching out for external training. We're trying to get external help. Chris mentioned Katie at the end of our presentation. She'll be coming back to the practice on the 23rd of June to do a full day workshop. The primary focus on that, actually, to touch on your last question about how to work with introverts, we're going to be doing a full team session on how to work better together creatively and solve problems in a more kind of inclusive and innovative environment. So I think the kind of the number one thing for us, I think, is just to, or the big lesson from this practice a year, is just to keep looking beyond the bounds of a small practice, try and draw on that help and external expertise. And we've arrived at the point where we know now it's something we need to make the step to investing in financially, and just doing a great job of kind of patching over this next problem for us to solve. Yeah, so quite a transition as to how we're sort of seeing things over the last year and a half.
Definitely, and I think what we studied, as you know, in your practice management side of things, didn't come anywhere close to like the real experience. So maybe this is a case of, you know, you can put some of your experience and go back into a school and kind of add that kind of real life well-being practice management to the younger architects, who possibly either to let them know what they should expect in a practice while they're applying, and maybe some of the questions they should ask during at the interview stage, like you know, what do you do for staff? I mean, Julie and Emily, do you know if that question is often asked by potential employees?
It is. I mean, I think increasingly, you know, people are looking at the whole offer. It's not just about, you know, job titles and monetary benefits. You know, they really want to see what they're going to be embedded in. And actually, my reason for joining Assael was very much driven out of wanting to be part of a community that didn't just talk the talk. You know, they actually lived out the values, and it was evident. And I remember first visiting and observing how people were interacting, and it really spoke of who they are, and that, you know, they genuinely have people at the heart of the business, and everything else, you know, kind of follows on. And you know, I've worked in many types of business, and actually, I think maybe about 2 out of the 10, you know, really have that authentic leadership where they're really sort of putting the people first, trying to integrate, support, value each individual, as well as being part of a collective community. And you know, it does exist, and it's fantastic, you know. And I wanted to come here to operate as an HR professional in an environment that really was about the people and everything, you know, that stems out of that. So it's yeah, and I think, you know, people join us, choose us also for those reasons, because it's evident, you know, what we're doing for the people here.
Thanks, Julie. Emily, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the culture of a practice is incredibly important, and I think, as you said, Julie, you've got to be able to walk the walk. And I think you know, the fact that I've been there 13 years, I think speaks volumes. And actually, you know, we're working day in, day out with each other, 8, 9, 10 hours a day, and it's important to have that, you know, we've got each other's back, and have that community feel as we go forwards. And if you don't, the retention, you know, you'll soon see it in numbers in terms of a revolving door. And I like to think it's not easy to get that right, but I think it's incredibly important.
Thank you. We have a question here from Cleo, and she asks, how do you translate and/or communicate your culture and mindset to your clients? And to what extent does it help clients' relationships in your respective practices? So maybe we just go around the table with that. Julie, do you want to start with that one? How do you translate and communicate your culture and mindset to your clients?
I mean, again, I think it's people led. I mean, we talk about, you know, design, you know, the sort of financial aspects of the project, the people involved, and also, you know, what we do sort of in the bigger community, and about making a difference, giving something back. And it's those 4 sort of pillars that are presented, you know, in terms of who we are internally, but also out externally, and evident in terms of how we deal with each other and support each other and speak to our clients, and have an openness to kind of hear and listen and support and offer everything we do to our employees, you know, to our clients as well. So I would say that's how it sort of translates out there.
Thanks. And Emily?
Yeah, I think it's. I think we're being asked more and more about it. So in bid work, I think it's coming up more frequently. Well, what does it look like? What does your wellbeing program look like? I think it's about communicating externally as well. So the social media platforms, which I don't think. Which I think we can get better at. I don't think we're utilising the social media platforms that we could be doing. So actually, I think it's a really good question, because it's not something I think we pay enough attention to. We make sure we communicate what we're doing internally, but I think personally, for the work I'm doing, we could do much more of that in terms of client communication as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Emily. Carl?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about buildings as platforms for people, and we're really focusing on people and, yeah, the benefits that working with us can bring to either your team of people or the general public. And yeah, we increasingly use social media as a main outreach. Instagram in particular, we tend to repost a lot of images that other people post of our buildings and places to show the actual experience of other people. So we stopped focusing on the architecture and what things are made of and why they look like they do, and we're thinking about how they're used and how people interact with them. And we definitely try and talk much more about the benefits of working with us. So whether it's increasing footfall to high streets and things that actually people can understand as a real benefit. And I think our whole culture of, you know, we exist to help communities thrive, and actually looking at what that means to an individual client or a group of clients. What communities are we working with? I think communities become a really overused word, but, you know, we're using it in a very general way, but we focus in really specifically on groups of people. And I think, yeah, that our whole mindset has really become driven around our kind of culture and thinking around people, and how, you know, ultimately we want to design kind of low tech, fairly affordable buildings, so that buildings are actually affordable for normal quote unquote people, rather than kind of very expensive, very high end, you know, great pieces of architecture that actually are quite elitist. So we definitely know what we want to design and who we want to design for. We try and speak to that.
Thanks, Carl. And just another question onto that, and I'll also ask the guys from Kennedy Woods about that question. Oh God, it slipped my mind. How easy was it for you to kind of stop thinking or change your thought about what architecture is with the recent conversations that have happened? So whereas before architecture was about, look at my pretty building, what I've done, aren't I great? Look at my award that I've kind of got. And just like you said, you're more talking about the user and stuff. How easy was that transition in conversation?
I think it's been a kind of gradual transition over the last 2 or 3 years, and it's something that I'm really passionate about. But in all honesty, we still have or have had reluctance within the studio, with particularly younger architects who are like obsessed with their portfolio and designing buildings as objects. So it's a constant discussion about whether the building is for you as the designer or for the people that are going to use it. So I'm very much pushing towards the latter. Of course, we're all designers. We all like to design lovely things and for it to look great. But what I'm saying to people is that's not the be all and end all. And maybe there's been way too much of that in the past. And I think the fact that a lot of our work is quite temporary in nature helps us think in that way. And we're trying to apply the idea of meanwhile or temporary thinking to pretty much everything we do now, as a way of really getting to the nub of what's the least that you have to do to get something to be functional and usable by people. And I think it's quite a critical mindset that we've had internally, but it's not always easy bringing the sort of younger designers who are just keen to kind of like design cool buildings.
Thanks. And Tom and Chris, I'll repeat the first question and then add the second one on. How do you translate and/or communicate your culture and mindset to your clients? And to what extent does it help client relationships in your respective practice?
Well, I think for us, it's a bit of the kind of trying to show, not tell. Like we're really values led. I think we have them up on the website, and I think we obviously try and make expectations around how we behave really explicit. But ultimately, I think it's shown through the workshops we run, or the the initial meetings and things when we're kind of scoping a project. I think trying to bring in like how we would approach things, maybe using more kind of user-centered research or kind of workshops as the basis for kind of kicking off projects, and saying we're not going to come in here and say we've got all the answers, we're a young studio, but what we can do is bring a mindset to really like work with people who might help us uncover them, and really keep searching and keep trying to approach things in different ways. So I think ultimately it's about kind of playing to our unique characteristics and not trying to be in a situation where there's lots of other small practices competing on price for jobs. So I think you've got to really find like things that are unique about both your internal culture, but how they translate to working relationships, both with the clients, but also with potentially communities that you're designing for. As to how much that helps, the second point, I guess we should probably be talking to clients a bit more and seeing how much they've made that that jump from kind of how we're setting out stall at the outset, and then later on we always look to build kind of lasting relationships and find that repeat work is what makes for like quite a healthy pipeline in the practice. But yeah, it'd be interesting to kind of hear in their words how that initial impression and the later on relationship, how they kind of correlate.
Thanks, guys. I think just from all of the conversations, I think not only is there a new practice model, it's that there's a new practice mindset that's emerging, and that will affect all practices, and it can have from a large practice can have an impact on a smaller practice. So it's kind of like this osmosis of ideas and caring and sharing that's kind of happening. It's exciting, and it's really good for you guys to come on and share what you're doing and share your thoughts. And with that said, I think we're almost at the end. We don't have any more questions left. Maybe if there's one last thought that each of you would like to leave with everybody, unless there's those of you that's still listening to us, if there's anything you want to ask, you've got like a minute and a half to put it in there. But let's just go around the screen. And Julie, is there any last thoughts that you would like to leave with everybody?
I think just over this time, what's really been apparent is we're all individuals, and this journey that we've all been on together has been very unique for each one, and it's being able to respond in a way that kind of incorporates the individual but is still keeping that community. So it's really sort of looking beyond the offer that we had in place, and trying to evolve and adapt it so that we can hit as many people and keep them sort of engaged and in the sort of mind of well-being, and just keep evolving the offer. Don't let it be static, because people's needs have shifted along at different times, at different paces, and they've needed very different things. So it's just being able to respond to that and hear and support the people as they require.
Thank you, Julie. And Emily?
Actually, echoing Julie, in that one size doesn't fit all. And Julie, you mentioned in your presentation about communication is key, and I think listening. I think we just need to listen to what our staff need from us and do our best to provide it.
Thanks, Emily. Carl?
Yeah, I would just, I guess, sort of reach out to smaller practices and just say that, you know, I think a great way forward is to network with other practices, to you know, set up groups, to share best practice, you know, problem shared is a problem halved, etc. You know, it's been a real support for us over the last couple of years, being part of the London Practice Forum, and before that, you know, groups of RIBA architects, and there's lots of groups out there. You can set your own up, but actually just forming some groupings where you meet maybe once a month or once every couple of weeks, just for an hour or two online. It's just a great way of being able to sort of share ideas and just, you know, get contacts, everything kind of from the boring stuff through to quite radical ideas about how to, some of the things we've been talking about tonight. So I think if you're sat in a small practice feeling totally isolated, you need to get out there and reach out to the other people. You know, everybody's in the same boat. And I think that's one of the things I've really seen in the last 10 years is that the industry has become much more open. People really want to share, and that's great to see, and I think it's really needed.
Thanks, Carl. And lastly, Chris and Tom?
I think parting word for me is just for people to see, you know, culture building as a design challenge. It's, you know, we're all creatives, and I think going beyond the boundaries of just thinking about architecture and thinking about design more broadly, these are, you know, if you start listening, if you start engaging with people and finding out what the issues are, a little bit of creativity goes a long way to finding solutions.
Thank you. Okay. And to everyone out there, don't forget RIBA London. We are here for you. We were a bit of a lifeline to some of our small practices during the initial lockdown. We actually did our practice visits. We just randomly called practices just to say, you know, how are you? How are you doing? And just like Emily said, you know, it's just that, how are you? It's not just about you as a person, how are you coping with your business? Some people were really, really pleased that, you know, we just called them and just to see how and they just wanted someone to talk to. And just like reinforce what Carl says, we do have our London Architects groups. So you can get involved, meet like-minded people. Some people dip in and out, but we are always there for you. So just to let you all know that Rion Williams has posted something. I'm just reading it, so I don't know what it says, but I'm assuming it's a she, but I'm aware of my pronouns. They said, not a question, but want to say thank you for all the talking. It's been really informative and great to hear all the creative ways of getting yourselves and staff through such difficult times. And I'm sure everybody on here echoes that. So thank you very much. And that's it from me today. I'd like to say thank you to all our speakers, to Julie, Emily, Carl, and Chris and Tom. And that being said, I think you've all had enough screen time for today, so hopefully you'll go away, spend some time somewhere outside just to catch a few moments breath. Yeah, that's me. Thanks very much for attending our first event, and look forward to seeing you all next. Bye-bye.
See you all.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.